In the blood-soaked chronicles of medieval Europe, kings were not always noble rulers or wise leaders. Some wore the crown like a blade, ruling through fear, cruelty, and merciless violence. Their names are etched into history not for their kindness, but for their brutality. From the burning villages of England to the impaled fields of Wallachia, from France's iron-fisted monarchs to Russia's fearsome czars, these rulers reshaped nations with terror. Tonight, we journey into the dark heart of medieval history, a broken bar, to uncover the top 10 most ruthless kings of Europe. These are not just stories of crowns and castles, they are tales of blood, betrayal, and fear. Prepare yourself, for what you are about to hear is not the glory of kings, but their cruelty. The Viking world was one of fire, iron, and endless hunger for power. Yet even among such warriors, Erik Blood Ox stood apart. He was the son of Harald Fairhor, Norway's first great king, but his path to the throne was not one of loyalty or wisdom, it was one of blood. One by one, Erik murdered his brothers, cutting down his rivals until only he remained. To the people, he was not simply a king, he was a butcher cloaked in royal robes. In the smoky mead halls of Norway, songs of Erik's rise were not sung in praise, but whispered in fear. They say that when he entered a hall, silence fell, and even his most loyal warriors lowered their gaze. His axe was not just a weapon, it was the symbol of his rule. His crown was won not by inheritance, but by slaughter. And from the very beginning, Erik Blood Ox proved that in medieval Europe, a king could seize power not by love, but by ruthless terror. Once he had claimed the throne, Erik carried his fury far beyond Norway's borders. The sea became his kingdom, and his longships his instruments of terror. He raided the coasts of Scotland and England with unrelenting cruelty. Villages were set ablaze, their people slaughtered or dragged away in chains. To the terrified monks who watched from their monasteries, Erik was not a man, but a force of destruction sent by the old gods of war. His enemies claimed he delighted in cruelty, sparing no prisoner and giving no mercy. Chronicles speak of whole communities wiped out, their churches looted, their crosses thrown into the fire. The North Sea became his hunting ground, and Europe trembled at the sound of his sails. Wherever Erik's fleet appeared on the horizon, fear spread like wildfire. He was not only a king, he was a shadow of death upon the waves. But cruelty is a fragile crown. For all his power, Erik's brutality created enemies at every turn. His people despised him, his rivals plotted against him, and even those who once fought by his side abandoned him in secret whispers. Exiled, betrayed, and hunted, Erik fled across kingdoms, clinging to power wherever he could. His final days came in Northumbria, where he ruled briefly as a king in exile. Yet his fate was sealed. Ambushed by rivals, Erik was struck down on a cold battlefield, his axe slipping from his hands for the last time. The man who had murdered his brothers, burned villages, and ruled with terror, died like any other warrior, his body left broken beneath the grey northern sky. His death was not mourned but remembered as a warning, for in the end, Erik Blood Ox showed Europe that a king who rules only through fear is destined to be destroyed by it. His story was the first chapter in the legacy of Europe's most ruthless rulers, a reminder that blood crowns are crowns that cannot endure. In England, the throne was not always guarded by courage, but often poisoned by greed. Few rulers are remembered with as much contempt as King John, brother of Richard the Lionheart. While Richard won fame in the Crusades, John stayed home, scheming, taxing, and crushing his people beneath endless demands for gold. He stole land from nobles, seized hostages from families, and treated oaths as tools to be broken whenever convenient. It was said that John's cruelty was not the violence of the battlefield, but the cold malice of tyranny. He starved prisoners to death in his dungeons, even his own nephew Arthur, whom he is rumored to have murdered with his own hands. His reign was marked by betrayal, manipulation, and fear. Yet John's cruelty had consequences. The barons of England, weary of his endless treachery, rose against him. And so, on the fields of Runnymede in 1215, King John was forced into humiliation, sealing the Magna Carta, a document that would limit his power and echo across history as the first great check on royal tyranny. John's legacy was not one of glory, but of ruthless failure, a warning that even the most feared kings can be broken by the will of the people. But where John's cruelty was rooted in deceit, his successor a century later, Edward I earned his ruthless name through sheer force of arms. Tall and imposing, Edward was called de Longshanks, and he sought to expand English dominion through unrelenting war. His greatest fury fell upon Scotland. To Edward, the Scots were rebels who dared to defy his crown, and rebellion demanded not negotiation, but annihilation. He waged war with merciless efficiency, burning towns, executing captured leaders, and displaying their bodies as warnings to others. His treatment of William Wallace, the Scottish patriot, revealed his brutal nature. Captured after years of resistance, Wallace was dragged to London, humiliated before a jeering crowd, and then executed in the most horrific way, hanged, drawn, and quartered, his body parts sent to different corners of the kingdom. To Edward, this was justice to history, it was ruthless terror dressed as law. His campaigns left Scotland scarred, and though the Scots would rise again, Edward's legacy remained etched into their memory as the Hammer of the Scots, a king who built his power on fear and blood. In both England and Scotland, the memory of these rulers revealed a truth about kingship in the medieval Isles. Power was rarely measured by compassion, but by the ability to crush opposition. John's cruelty earned him rebellion at home, while Edward's brutality won him fear abroad. Both men showed that a ruthless king might bend nations to his will, but he also forged resistance in the hearts of his enemies. From the Magna Carta to the Scottish Wars of Independence, their cruelty gave birth to legacies far greater than Thames Helvetia, legacies of freedom, resistance, and the demand for justice. In the Isles of medieval Europe, iron ruled, but iron could also be broken. In the heart of medieval France, one king ruled with a cold and calculating cruelty that earned him the name the Iron King. Philip IV was not a warrior like his ancestors. Instead, his ruthlessness came through cunning, manipulation, and merciless control. He drained his kingdom with endless taxes, targeting not only nobles, but even the church itself. When he clashed with Pope Boniface VIII, Philip dared what no king had attempted before. He humiliated the very head of Christendom, sending soldiers to capture and strike the Pope. But his darkest act was reserved for the Knights Templar. Accusing the order of heresy, he ordered their mass arrest. Torture chambers rang with screams as men were burned alive at the stake, their ashes scattered as warnings to others. In truth, Philip wanted their wealth, and he destroyed one of the greatest knightly orders in Europe to seize it. The Iron King had no pity, no remorse, only cold ambition, and though he died suddenly in 1314, legends whispered that the Templars cursed him with their final breath, condemning his bloodline to ruin. Within a generation, his dynasty collapsed, fulfilling the prophecy that ruthless power often consumes itself. If Philip IV ruled with icy cruelty, his descendant Charles V ruled with the terror of madness. At first, Charles was known as a fair and handsome king, beloved by his people. But as years passed, something broke within him. He began to suffer violent fits of insanity, striking down his own knights, attacking servants, and wandering the palace believing he was made of glass. His paranoia and cruelty grew so great that he banished his wife, abandoned his children, and executed those who tried to restrain him. France, caught in the 100 Years' War against England, crumbled under his rule. Armies went unpaid, villages burned, and nobles tore the kingdom apart in civil war. To his people, Charles was not just a failed king, he was a nightmare sitting on the throne, a ruler whose madness became a weapon of cruelty against his own subjects. The crown of France, once a symbol of glory, had become a cage of terror. From the cold iron will of Philip IV to the mad cruelty of Charles V, France's history revealed that ruthlessness could wear many masks. Some kings wielded it with precision, using fear as tool of politics. Others, broken by their own minds, unleashed it without reason, dragging their kingdoms into chaos. Yet in every case, cruelty left scars that outlived the kings themselves. The flames that consumed the Templars, the civil wars of Charles V, and the endless suffering of the people all reminded Europe that when rulers abandon mercy, they do not create strength, they sow destruction. France, the kingdom of chivalry and knights, became instead a stage for some of the darkest chapters in medieval rulership. And the people, though broken, remembered. Cruelty builds power quickly, but never securely. In the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick II, known as the wonder of the world, was admired for his brilliance, yet feared for his merciless rule. He was a man of contradictions, a lover of science, philosophy, and falconry, but also a master of cruelty. Frederick ruled with absolute control, crushing rebellion wherever it appeared. In Sicily, when nobles defied him, he laid waste to their lands, burning fields and salting the earth so nothing could grow. Prisoners of war were executed by the hundreds, their bodies displayed as grim warnings. He clashed with the papacy repeatedly, excommunicated more than once, yet he laughed at the curses of Rome. To his enemies, he was a heretic. To his subjects, he was both protector and tyrant. Frederick's empire was vast, but it was built on fear. His cruelty left a legacy of distrust, proving that even the most brilliant ruler could not escape the stain of ruthlessness. Not all cruelty came from strength, some of it came from weakness. In Bohemia, Wenceslas IV ruled not as a king of honor, but as a tyrant drowned in wine and madness. Known as the drunkard king, he wasted his power on excess, while his kingdom fell into ruin. His cruelty was personal and unpredictable. In drunken rages, he strangled priests with his bare hands, ordered noblemen beaten to death, and left the affairs of state neglected. The empire saw him not as a leader, but as a disgrace. His ruthless outbursts sparked rebellion after rebellion, as his subjects could no longer endure his violent madness. Wenceslas proved that a weak king could be just as dangerous as a strong one, because his cruelty was not calculated, but reckless, spilling over onto anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. Yet perhaps the most infamous act of cruelty in the empire came with Sigismund, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Hungary. He summoned the reformer Jan Hus to the Council of Constance under a promise of safe passage. But when Hus arrived, Sigismund betrayed him, handing him over to the church. Hus was condemned as a heretic and burned alive, his cries echoing as flames consumed him. Sigismund, unmoved, declared it was justice for defying both king and pope. But his treachery unleashed the fury of the Hussite Wars, a rebellion that bled Central Europe for decades. In betraying one man, Sigismund ensured generations of conflict. His cruelty was not just in the fire that killed Hus, but in the broken word of a king, of betrayal that scarred the empire forever. In medieval Castile, one king became so infamous for his brutality that history remembers him simply as Peter the Cruel. His reign began with hope. He, young, ambitious, and determined to strengthen the crown. But quickly, his rule turned into a storm of blood. Peter trusted no one, not even his own family. Brothers, cousins, and nobles who opposed him were executed without mercy. His dungeons overflowed with prisoners, and rumors spread of torture chambers beneath the palace. At court, betrayal was met not with exile, but with the sword. He grew paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere. Yet his cruelty did not stop at home. During his wars with Aragon and Granada, he ordered entire towns burned, their inhabitants slaughtered. Chroniclers claimed that even his allies feared sitting too close to him at a feast, for a smile from the king could quickly turn into an order of death. Some would later call him Peter the Just, arguing he punished corrupt noblesse, but the rivers of blood he spilled proved that justice in his hands was little different from vengeance. Before Peter, his grandfather Alfonso XI had already shown the ruthless streak of Castilian kings. Alfonso's reign was defined by endless war against Granada, against rebellious nobles, and even against the plague itself. He fought with determination, but his methods were merciless. Nobles who resisted him were strangled in their sleep or poisoned at feasts. He commanded sieges with such brutality that entire Moorish garrisons were executed after surrendering, their heads displayed on city walls as trophies. Alfonso also forced his subjects into military campaigns during the Black Death, when villages were already starving and desperate. To his people, he was both protector and tyrant, a king who would sacrifice anything, even his own subjects, to maintain his throne. Yet in the end, death claimed him as it did so many. Alfonso himself perished from the plague while laying siege to Gibraltar, leaving behind a legacy of iron rule marked as much by cruelty as by conquest. Before Peter, his grandfather Alfonso XI had already shown the ruthless streak of Castilian kings. Alfonso's reign was defined by endless war against Granada, against rebellious nobles, and even against the plague itself. He fought with determination, but his methods were merciless. Nobles who resisted him were strangled in their sleep or poisoned at feasts. He commanded sieges with such brutality that entire Moorish garrisons were executed after surrendering, their heads displayed on city walls as trophies. Alfonso also forced his subjects into military campaigns during the Black Death, when villages were already starving and desperate. To his people, he was both protector and tyrant, a king who would sacrifice anything, even his own subjects, to maintain his throne. Yet in the end, death claimed him as it did so many. Alfonso himself perished from the plague while laying siege to Gibraltar, leaving behind a legacy of iron rule marked as much by cruelty as by conquest. In 1066, William of Normandy crossed the English Channel and seized a crown through blood and fire. Known forever as William the Conqueror, his victory at Hastings was only the beginning. To secure his rule, he unleashed the infamous harrying of the North. When northern lords rebelled, William's response was ruthless. Villages were burned to ash, crops destroyed, and livestock slaughtered. Winter brought famine, and tens of thousands starved in the frozen wastelands of Yorkshire. Chroniclers wrote that corpses lay unburied, fields turned to deserts, and wolves prowled where once farmers had lived. William did not rule with kindness, but with terror, ensuring that no Englishman would dare rise against him again. His conquest reshaped the island forever, but it was carved into history with fire and starvation. A century later, England suffered under King John, remembered as one of its most despised monarchs. His cruelty was not just in war, but in greed. He taxed his nobles and peasants into misery, demanding coin for every favor, every law, every pardon. Those who resisted paid with their lives. John was infamous for imprisoning noble families and starving them in dungeons. He even captured the wife and son of a rebel baron and allowed them to die of hunger as punishment. His wars in France bled the treasury dry, and his cruelty at home drove his barons to rebellion. The result was the Magna Carta, a document forced upon him at sword's point, limiting his power. Yet John's ruthlessness had already scarred the kingdom. His reign proved that a king could lose more through cruelty than through weakness. But perhaps no English king embodied ruthless conquest like Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots. Determined to bring Scotland under English rule, Edward unleashed brutal campaigns across the Highlands. Castles were besieged, villages torched, and rebels executed in savage displays. He captured William Wallace, the Scottish freedom fighter, and ordered him executed in the most brutal manner imaginably, hanged, drawn, and quartered before cheering crowds. Edward's cruelty was meant to break the spirit of Scotland, but instead it fueled centuries of resistance. Even in death, his enemies cursed his name. To the English, he was a king of iron and conquest. To the Scots, he was a tyrant whose shadow lingered long after his bones were laid to rest. Edward proved that ruthlessness could win battles, but never erased the will of the people. In the dark forests of Wallachia, one ruler's cruelty became the stuff of legend. Of Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler. To his people, he was a defender against the Ottoman tide, but to his enemies, he was a monster. Vlad's preferred punishment was impalement, driving wooden stakes through the bodies of his foes, leaving them writhing in agony for days before death claimed them. Fields of the impaled stretched for miles, a forest of human suffering designed to terrify invaders. It is said that when the Ottoman army advanced, they found 20,000 corpses impaled outside Centrogavietent. Horrified, they turned back without battle. To his allies, Vlad was ruthless but effective. To his enemies, he was a nightmare given flesh. His name would inspire the legend of Dracula, ensuring that his cruelty lived on, centuries beyond his bloody reign. Further east, in Russia, Ivan IV earned a name that echoed through Historia. Ivan the Terrible. At first a promising ruler, he transformed into a tyrant consumed by paranoia and rage. His secret police, the Oprichniki, swept across the land in black robes, burning villages and slaughtering families accused of treason. Ivan's cruelty reached even his own blood. He struck his heir, Ivan Ivanovich, in a fit of rage, killing him with a blow to the head. The murder left Russia without a strong successor, plunging it into chaos. His massacres were legendary. In Novgorod, he slaughtered tens of thousands, drowning men, women, and children in the freezing river. Ivan's ruthlessness was both a weapon and a curse. He expanded Russia's lands, but he left behind a legacy of terror, a broken people, and a throne haunted by blood. From France to Russia, from England to Spain, medieval Europe was shaped by rulers whose cruelty left scars on nations. Some believed fear was the surest path to power. Others ruled with paranoia, rage, or greed. Their ruthlessness brought victories, but also endless rebellions, betrayals, and suffering. History remembers them not as noble kings, but as warnings of unchecked power. Their crowns were heavy with blood, their legacies darkened by the cries of the people they ruled. And yet, their stories endure because cruelty, like conquest, leaves marks that cannot be erased. They remind us that kings are not only makers of nations, but breakers of lives. And in the shadow of their rule, Europe was forever changed. And so ends our journey through the shadows of medieval Europe. From William the Conqueror's scorched lands to Ivan the Terrible's rivers of blood, these kings proved that power without mercy becomes tyranny. They ruled through fear, they conquered with cruelty, and they left behind legacies drenched in blood. Yet history does not forget them because their ruthlessness shaped the world we live in today. Some call them heroes of order, others curse them as monsters. But one truth remains: the crown has always carried the weight of blood. If you enjoyed this dark voyage into history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of kings, battles, and empires. Until next time, a broken bar. Remember, the line between ruler and tyrant is written in the lives of those they ruled.